right, so we are live, and I'm with Mark Edwards. And before we start, hi, Mark. Thanks for coming on. Let me do a little intro for those who stumble upon this in the future and wonder, what this is all about and what I'm trying to accomplish here. So, my name is Rod Graham, and this is another installment of my Being series. And what I try to do with this series is find interesting people, of which Mark is one, and not only try and understand how they came to be, something about their past background, which a lot of folks don't often do, I think. But I'll try and understand how they came to be with a few pointed questions, and then try and understand how they see the world. Get their take on some of the issues of the day. So that's what this is about. And I've been on Mark's podcasting. We'll talk about podcasting. It's a very good podcast. He's a bit better podcaster than I am.
No.
Most definitely. And so when we get to that point where we talk about podcasting, I'll tell you why. Right. So he's a fellow podcaster, and I was on his show, and I enjoyed it, and maybe we'll do it again in the future. So, Mark,
Rod.
what were you doing on a Saturday night 10 years ago?
Saturday night 10 years ago, I was probably either. Actually, you know what? I'm coming up on my paramedic recert, which means I would have been starting my paramedic clinicals 10 years ago. Which means I was probably just absolutely shit-faced somewhere, and trying my best to destroy all of my future prospects. That I was a fairly self-destructive person up until not as many years ago as I would like, but
Okay.
I was probably a semester into paramedic school, and was that was right around the time that I was kind of like in the year-long process of like hitting my personal bottom, where I was getting sober. And that's probably what I was doing, was somewhere between either studying for a test and being so drunk that I would wake up naked in the woods. Somewhere in that spectrum of behavior.
Okay. Wow. Very interesting. So so you say get sober. So you're sober now. You don't partake in any
Um,
substances.
I don't drink.
Okay.
I consume Delta 8, which is a legal variant of cannabis in the state that I live. If cannabis were legal, I would use that.
Mhm.
I am a prior user. I don't do anything that is illegal in the jurisdiction where I presently live. However, were I to move to jurisdictions where psychedelics were legal, I would probably consume them about once every 6 months, which is sort of my own personal like reset button. I actually credit psychedelics a great deal with my sobriety. They put a lot of stuff into perspective for me. And like many other people out there, I think they help with just realigning your perspective on things. So I've found them valuable. I've considered taking like road trips to go to places like I think in Portland or Oregon. There are various states where mushrooms are
Mhm.
legal, and I considered doing that. But in terms of when I say sober, I just mean I don't drink anymore. That was my particular substance of the thing that I used to give myself an excuse for bad behavior and also not think about that bad behavior. Any other substances that I've used have either been helpful or fairly benign in how they've affected my life. Like I basically take Delta 8 edibles to go to sleep, and then psychedelics I do as like or would do as a sort of like an intentional spiritual experience, for lack of a better word, with a lot of intention around it.
That's interesting. So I have been trying to not drink, and
Mhm.
I can go for a little while, and I'm like, oh, come on. So I'll go out, I'll get some wine or some vodka, and then I'll play I love to play this video game. And so I don't do any other stuff. Like I can't nothing like not even marijuana or something. But
Mhm.
I would feel like almost like at a loss if I couldn't have my drink 2 or 3 times a week. But I've been told that
Mhm.
that's the worst drug to take. Like it's the one that does the most damage
Mhm.
to your body. I have a friend of mine, a contact at least, I guess I would call John a friend, who said something very similar to what you said, John Pike, if he happens to watch this later, where he said that psychedelic experiences can be very beneficial. He
Mhm.
may even use the same phrase, put things in perspective. I don't know, but yeah, I'm getting that now. That there's a lot of people who are saying what you're saying.
Yeah, and I was not like a 3 time a week drinker. I was like a fifth of liquor a day, like, drinker.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a
Um,
lot. Yeah.
and I was also a junkie as well. I was on, hooked on pills for a good little bit. And, I don't do opiates either
Hmm.
for similar
Hmm.
reasons, or consume opiates. In fact, in the 8 years since I've been sober, I haven't had any desire to do them, but that's just because of, uh, how I stopped taking them. And I have taken, Percocets once since I quit using them habitually, and that was when I got my wisdom teeth taken out, and I didn't have an issue putting them back down. Like, I took them for pain, and then when the pain went away, I stopped.
Hmm.
Um, but, yeah, psychedelics are, I mean, to be fair, like, I've had some of the most beautiful experiences of my life. Like, I understand the people who wrote the Bible a little better, after having taken psychedelics. The whole, there's a reason the first thing the angels say is, "Be not afraid." So, like, I get that, now, but
Okay, I was gonna say, is this guy trying to tell me that the disciples who wrote the Bible were high? But no, you're saying something different.
well, so, like, I think that the states that psychedelic drugs give you access to are not necessarily unique to those drugs. I think that they're accessible via other means. Like, there are people who've had brain injuries or who have had like epileptic conditions or who have, through very deep meditation, approached similar states of being and have described similar states of consciousness. Really, most of the psychedelics, like the tryptamine-based psychedelics, are biochemically very similar to serotonin, like an endogenous neurotransmitter. So there, it's not that big of a shift chemically in your brain to
Hmm.
produce those deeply profound effects. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that, say, you know, the author of Revelations was tripping on DMT when he wrote that book, but I think that he may have had an organic brain condition that put him in a similar neurological state as as one that can be accessed by way of those drugs.
He was touched by an angel, which then gave him
Yeah.
the chemical reactions. Okay,
Yeah.
so 10 years ago, um, you were at a time in your life where you're shifting away from you had hit your bottom or about to hit your bottom,
Mhm.
and you're also in paramedic school. Is that what it's
Mhm.
called?
Yeah,
Okay, so
it's a 2-year associate's degree. It's very similar to, nursing school.
okay, well that kind of leads us into our next question then. Why did you choose this very stressful, it seems, I mean, from the outside looking in, profession? Why are you a paramedic?
Yeah, it's very stressful. I don't do it anymore. I
I
quit
see.
I quit, like, probably about 6 months ago.
Okay, so why
Um,
were you a
um,
paramedic?
well, technically, I am still, like, I have my license and I work in an ER, but I'm not on an ambulance anymore. Um, did you ever see the movie Bringing Out the Dead with
I did
Nicolas
not.
Cage? I would highly recommend it. It's a very good movie. That and, Leaving Las Vegas and,
I
more
saw that.
recently Pig are movies that I point to when I say Nicolas Cage is actually a very, very good actor. He is intentionally being hammy when he's hammy.
Mm.
But Bringing Out the Dead it's a Martin Scorsese film, and it's based on a book written by a man who was a paramedic in the 90s in New York during the crack epidemic. And it basically follows this Nicolas Cage playing a burnt out paramedic over the course of a 3-day weekend where he slowly loses his mind to the stress of the job. And it's actually very funny, and it's also very touching, and it's also deeply disturbing. And I saw that movie when I was 13, and I was like, that seems like a really cool job. I'm going to do that. And it like
Mm.
stuck in the back of my head. And my brother actually is a paramedic. He was going to paramedic school around the same time. He's like 15 years older than me. So that was, he really liked the job, and he always said I'd be good at it because I have the sort of personality that admits of doing that type of profession. Um, so anyway, didn't become a paramedic. I fucked around for like 10 years. I got a job in sales. I basically spent the entirety of my 20s in the bottom of a bottle somewhere, being just the biggest piece of shit that I could possibly be, uh, as frequently as I could be it. And uh, I got fired from my sales job, unrelated to my alcoholism, but related to the personality defects that went with it.
Mhm.
And I didn't really have anything to do. I was just kind of floating around, and I was 24, 26, somewhere around there. I was in my mid 20s, and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of a loser. I haven't really accomplished anything. My mother at the time had was in the process of being. She is a breast cancer survivor and being diagnosed with stage 4 renal failure and about to go on dialysis.
Mm.
Um, and I was like, well, why don't I just go move back home, live with the folks, go to paramedic school, actually get my shit together, do something productive that'll be helpful in the world. Maybe I'll be good at it. And I can help out with them as well. And then I basically spent the next 2 years while I was in medic school, like slowly doing the work of like getting my shit together and getting sober, and failing and succeeding at varying rates and
Mhm.
fits and starts. But eventually, like on the other side of that, I came out fairly decent, I think. In terms of why I wanted to be a paramedic, I think I wanted to do something that would be helpful to the world, that would test me in a way that few other things would, that didn't require the commitment that joining the military would have required of me. Um, and I also, when I was a little kid, I always wanted to join the military, and um, I, for political reasons, ultimately decided that I didn't want to participate in the military industrial complex and the imperialism of the U.S. government. So I that was kind of out, and that left EMS. So that's kind of just what I fell into.
That's really interesting. So, okay, I'm going to stereotype a little bit here.
Okay, that's fair.
Um, you strike me as a very thoughtful, reflective person,
Thank you.
which does not seem to go with a type of job like being a paramedic, which seems to be, you should not be reflecting or thoughtful. You should be, kind of a more active person in a way.
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, that's what fucked me up.
I see. I see.
I so there's and I'm gonna toot my own horn here. I'm a very, very good paramedic. And it I struggled a lot with the decision to leave EMS because, and I've talked about this in other podcast episodes where I've done, where There are a lot of good people in healthcare, particularly emergency healthcare. Very good people who really want to do the best that they can for people, but there are an equal, if not a larger number of absolutely horrible fucking human beings, who are just the most distasteful, vulgar, just vile people you'll ever meet. Um, like I've lost count of how many times I've heard coworkers say that we should just let homeless people freeze to death in the street, or we shouldn't resuscitate junkies who have overdosed because fuck them, they made their choice, right? Like
Mhm.
shit like that. Like going into low income housing, and it's like, how can those people live like that? And we all know what they mean by those people.
Right, right, right.
Um, so like
Well, wait. Let,
EMS.
let, let me let
Mhm,
me push back a little bit. I'm not going to defend
mhm,
that kind of behavior, but I'm going to try and explain it.
mhm,
So, could it be that those folks, they're in that environment so much until they may have come in as, sort of, I'm going to help save the world, almost like teachers do in a way. Oh,
mhm.
this is going to, I'm going to make a difference. And then after a while, the environment produces a kind of cynicism and you stop caring about people as much. I mean, could that be a part of it?
Well, that's absolutely a part of it.
Mhm,
That is 100% a part of it. I think if you were to like take every bad paramedic, and you were to like line them up, probably an that effect that you just described has touched every one of them.
mhm,
As to how many of them came into the job, uh, for bad reasons. Like I've often said, the most terrifying human being on the planet is somebody who became a paramedic because they were too afraid to become a cop. And there
mm,
are a lot of those people. But I think that those make up like the people that I consider to be just like dyed in the wool, shitty human beings. I think those actually make up a minority of the people that I'm talking about. I think
mhm,
you're very correct. The environment of emergency healthcare, the way that the culture is, the way our lack of resources are fundamentally, and I can get into a rant about American healthcare in general, the burdens that are placed on the emergency services in America because of how poorly run our healthcare system is, does create a attitude of nihilism. Of it's easier to look at people who are struggling and hurting and who are not necessarily going to be the nicest people in the world, right? You spend a month living on the streets, if not years, you're not going to be, and you can't see a doctor because you don't have health care, because America is a fucking, late stage capitalist dystopia. Right. And the only way you have access to anything approaching healthcare is to call an ambulance. And this motherfucker who's got a GED and a 2-year community college degree is now your primary care physician because reasons. Um, you're not
hmm,
going to be the happiest person in the world, and you're probably going to take it out on that paramedic. And then that paramedic, in turn, after multiple times of
yeah,
dealing with
yeah,
that,
yeah.
is going to become eventually a shitty person, right? It's just how it is. And I saw that happen so many times, and I saw the absolute desolation of how we treat the least among us. Like my office was the gutter, right? It's where the people who are no longer productive and where we discard into tenement buildings, or um, nursing homes that are basically just there to siphon Medicare money away while people die in a closet. Like just the dark places that normal people don't want to think about. Like that's where I
Mhm,
spent most of my time. And eventually that breaks a person. And it either breaks you in such a way that you realize you can't do it anymore and you either quit, or like many people I know, you paint the ceiling the hard way. Um,
mm,
or you become a fucking bastard and you just keep doing it, and you hate poor people and minorities because those are the people you encounter a lot, and you already were kind of a little racist to begin with, and it's easier to take it out on them.
huh. Now, do paramedics get props, for lack of a better word? Like, do people go, "Oh, wow, you're a paramedic. You're a first responder. You know, I salute you. Thank you for your service." This type of thing.
That's about all they get. Um, so that's kind of a joke in EMS is nobody knows what the fuck we do. Everybody thanks the fire department or they thank the cops,
Mm.
and nobody really knows what EMS does. And it like we get an occasional thank you for your service, but it's really that's kind of it. We don't really get the support or the resources that we would need. For instance, the EMS agency I worked for during the entirety of the COVID-19 pandemic, my hourly pay was for the entirety of that pandemic while I was wearing inadequate PPE, and being lied to about what the PPE they were giving us was capable of doing.
What is PPE?
Personal protective equipment, so like
Okay. Okay.
face masks, gowns, things like that.
Mhm.
We were being given like N95 respirators and like that were inadequate for what we were doing. It was a whole thing. We were just not adequately prepared for what was happening. And instead of just telling us these were the resources that we had, they lied to us about the efficacy of what we were doing and told us that we shouldn't be complaining. And during um, that entire 2 years, I was making roughly the same thing I would make as if I were go to be a cashier at Sheets. Which
Wow.
isn't to like I'm a socialist, right? Like I don't have like I think people at Sheet should make enough to have a livable wage, but like
Mhm.
certainly if I'm doing that type of work, I should be making more than that. It's very dangerous. It's hazardous to my health. It's very stressful. And we were told that, we should just be thankful that we still have jobs because of the economic concessions that were made because of the lack of tax revenue during the pandemic. And then, as it turned out, our county actually made money during the pandemic. Um, so that kind of thing was stressful. And it wasn't until literally a month ago that they finally increased paramedic pay to be commiserate with what nurses make. And that is because they lost roughly 40% of their field staff because of that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Including
it's not a
you. You
very,
decided
yeah,
to move on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like the definition of a thankless job, which is it's fine. I don't have a problem doing a thankless job provided I'm compensated for it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's nice to do things because it helps society, but you also have to help yourself too. I mean,
Yeah.
so, no, I understand. I understand totally.
Um,
Now, so what are you thinking of doing now, or where are you thinking of going with your life in terms of your career or job?
so it took a lot for me to leave EMS because as much as I talk shit about the profession and all of it, it really is like I do want to sing the praises of the industry a little bit just so I don't sound like a complete curmudgeon. Like I've lost count of how many people's lives I've legitimately saved, right? And
Mhm.
like I I have, and particularly knowing that many of my coworkers are pieces of shit, like I personally have made a difference in the lives of other people because of the way I've behaved on certain calls. And like I've had people like cry like because they told me that I was the first person when they called like a homeless person who's in a shelter. Cry because every other time they've called 911, somebody treats them like garbage, and I actually treat them like a human being. Or uh, you know, drug addicts, people, like things I have experience with, I treat those people like human beings, and that's a very
Mhm.
rewarding feeling knowing that you've made a difference in somebody else's life. And when it all comes together and it all works great, it's beautiful. Like there's no other feeling in the world quite like being on a high acuity call and having a team that knows what they're doing and everything goes the right way and you literally just pull somebody back from the brink of death. Like there's nothing else like that in the world. You don't get that in the emergency room. Like, most doctors don't know what that feels like because they're just not out in the field. They don't get that. And it was hard to let go of, but I eventually had to, because of combined stress and, that thing I just described. That's the most beautiful feeling in the world, happens maybe 3 or 4 times a year. And the
Hmm.
rest of it is, like telling mothers that their children aren't gonna be waking up, right? Like, it's just eventually it wears on you. So I had to leave, and I really don't want to be in healthcare anymore at all. Everything I liked about healthcare was specific to being on an ambulance, right? It was
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
like all the cool stuff. Like, I don't get that in the emergency room. I don't want to be a nurse. So I am going to get a a Salesforce certification, which is like a marketing IT type thing. It's basically what customer management software runs on, and I'm just going to be I'm going to work from home and do IT stuff from home and make far more money than I ever would have in EMS, and spend what free time I have because of that doing other things that are productive for the world, hopefully. um, I
Mm.
have a uh, I have a plan. As soon as I'm in a work from home position and I have a bit more free time and I can actually dedicate to doing the project, I am going to make and probably like a 50 or 60 episode video series teaching basic first aid, um, how to manage like any type of first aid stuff that you would encounter as a regular person in your day-to-day life, and also specific to street medics who are working at protests and things like that, and try to tailor that and just put it out into the world as like a single entity and help with that.
I think that'd be very useful. A lot of people can benefit from that. Okay. All right. Well, good luck with that, man. I mean, that's certainly a shift, and we'll see what happens. Maybe when we do this again in a couple of years, you'll be in your palatial home talking about your your six-figure salary, and
Yeah,
we can
hopefully.
reminisce. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when was the last time you failed?
Um, so the last time I failed was actually the last EMS call that I ran. We went to a drug overdose. It was a woman who had overdosed in a parking lot, and we resuscitated her. And we were hanging out with her in the back of an ambulance, and she's we're like trying to get her to because we can actually, at the service I worked for, we don't have to take people to the emergency room. Like, if they're medically cleared, we can take them to a rehab facility, right? There's no reason to take you to an emergency room. If you took heroin, I gave you Narcan, the Narcan fixed the heroin, your vitals are fine, let's just take you to rehab, right? um Provided that person wants to go, right? They're an
Hmm.
adult, they
Hmm.
can refuse care. um and I'm trying to convince this woman to go to rehab because her friend is there, and her friend is like, listen, she's lying to you, like, we've been through this 100 times, like, she's going to get more heroin if she doesn't already have some, and she's going to overdose again in the next 10 minutes. I was like, I know. Like, I know. And so I'm talking to this woman for like an hour, and this is actually one of those incidents where like she started crying because I was talking to her like a human being. And I was like, listen, I know what you like. Like, I told the cops to get out of the ambulance because I don't need like McGruff the crime dog over my shoulder while I'm talking to this lady. And I'm like, listen, I literally like I've been talking to this lady for like 40 minutes trying to get her to go to rehab, and I finally just like stop, and I'm like, listen. Then I say her name. I was like, I am done bullshitting with you. uh, I used to be a junkie. I know that you're lying to me. You know that you're lying to me. you're going to go get high as soon as you leave this truck. Everything that you just said to me for the last 40 minutes, the same story you keep repeating over and over and over again, it's bullshit. We both know it's bullshit. You're going to go die in a parking lot. And I was still debating in my head whether or not I was going to work my notice or just quit that day. Like, I was that burnt out, and I was like, listen, this very well might be my last EMS call I ever run, and I would really like it to go out on a high note, and I would like you to come to rehab with me instead of going and dying in a parking lot. And she's like, she like started crying. She's like, "You're right. Like, you're right." I was like, "Yeah, I know I'm right. Like, like, come on, let's go. Like, let's stop this bullshit. Let's go." She's like, I need to get well one more time. Like, no, you fucking don't. Like, that's like, I've said that. I know what that means. We both know it's not true. And anyway, we went back and forth like that for like an hour, and I couldn't convince her to go, and she eventually refused care and got out of the truck, and uh, I assume went and overdosed again.
Mhm.
Because the shit that she bought, like, because she told me how much she took, right, and it was like her normal dose, and I believe her when she told me that, which means that the stuff that she bought was full of fentanyl. Which, she probably got it from the same, but in that area, like, all of the heroin has fentanyl in it. So, like, there's no way, like, she almost certainly, like, if she didn't die, she was somebody else's call after that. And then I just like called my supervisor and was like, "Hey, I'm going the fuck home. I'm not working my notice," and I quit.
Hmm. You couldn't save that person, or you imagine that she
Yeah.
went and maybe, as you said, died in a parking lot. Okay, so Mark, you know what? I was gonna also respond with the last time I failed, but I don't think that what I have to say can compare.
Oh
I
no,
was
go
gonna,
for it. Maybe it's a happier failure. I don't.
no, not really. I was just gonna, tell the audience that as an academics, we fail all the time, probably more than baseball players. If baseball players fail, a good baseball player fails 7 out of 10 times. The academics probably fail a little bit more than that because we get rejected all the time. We send off an article, it gets rejected. We try and get a grant, it gets rejected. And so
Mhm.
I'm on a losing streak of monumental proportions. I haven't been able to get a grant in some years now. So that's kind of what I was going to say, but that's not the same. That's not the same.
Well, I mean, I certainly hope that one day my most recent series of failures are in that same ballpark, and I can commiserate. Like I quit, so I shouldn't encounter those anymore. Um, but yeah, that
Okay.
was well, you know what? That actually wasn't even the most recent like failure. That's just the most recent like one that stuck out in my head. I'm sure like I fucked up at my current job because I mostly do COVID tests and start IVs on people, and I'm sure I missed an IV or two. So it's
Wow.
less high stakes. I just got to poke you again.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's shift gears then.
Mhm.
Now, before I ask you this, I think that certain people, so all accomplishments are a mix of, in my view, like some kind of something about the person that may be natural,
Mhm.
or just they come to the table with that already, and then also hard work, right? And so, when I was on your podcast the first time, I said, if this guy decides to stick with this and work at it, he's a natural. Right.
Well,
It's
thank
like
you.
yeah, man, you're very inquisitive. You've got the voice for it. See, my voice, it's good for a classroom. It really is. It carries, it's clear. Students in the back can hear it. But I'm not entirely sure if it's good for a podcast. And also my attention span only lasts for 1 hour. I want this to be an hour. but but I think a podcast, it should just have a natural flow. And if the person wants to kind of elaborate, you should let them do it, and you do that very well. So I'm
Yeah.
saying all that to say that you are good at this if you decide to keep doing it.
Well, thank
So
you.
why, yeah, man. So why are you podcasting?
Um, so, so it's kind of a mixed story. I didn't start out podcasting. I um I started out doing like audio essays, like just writing essays and recording
Mm,
them, and
mhm,
I would release that as a podcast and on YouTube. And I think there's one that's still up. I took most of them down because the quality was shit and I didn't really like them. But like I think the first one that I ever did is still the first episode of this podcast. And I was doing that because I was getting into video essays and like longer form content on YouTube and on podcasts and stuff.
mhm,
And I was like, these people aren't making a whole lot of money, but they're probably making enough to survive. And that was right around the point in my life COVID had just happened. And I was like, I need to get the fuck out of EMS. And I was like, I don't need to get out now, but there is a ticking clock on how long I can continue to do this.
mhm,
Um, and maybe if I really work at this diligently, I can make enough to not be a paramedic anymore. So it was really like a purely, I mean, I wanted to participate in the public conversation, right? Like I'm an intellectually curious person. I'm not very, I don't think I'm very smart in like the academic sense. Like I don't have a lot of information in my brain. It's just not there. Like I didn't go to school beyond an associate's degree. Um, but I'm inquisitive and I like to investigate things and read stuff and do research and like form my own thoughts. I was like, I could probably make a go of this, right? Um, and there was a niche at the time, like the IDW was still going strong, and I was like, I've got kind of a certain similar look to like a Joe Rogan type guy, and I've got like a similar cadence to like maybe I could sound a little bit like Sam Harris on a good day. I was like, maybe I can peel some of the people who are into these folks
mhm,
away
mhm,
from that. Maybe I can like, kind of like because I got pretty heavy into like Sam Harris for a while, like when I was younger, and the new atheism crowd, and eventually saw through the cracks and all that. And like you and I have spoken about like that sphere of people,
mhm,
and
mhm.
the toxicity that's present. And I was like, maybe I can peel people away. And so like I was like, I'll do this, and like maybe I can make a new, if not career, at least something to pay the bills and to be productive and helpful in that way. And I named the podcast, actually initially it was Reasoning Aloud, because I was trying to appeal to like the big galaxy genius brain folks.
Uh-huh.
And the
I
IR,
saw that. Yeah, that's
yeah.
right. Reasoning aloud. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the RSS feed is actually from Libsyn for the podcast is still Reasoning Aloud, because if I change that, I'll delete all the subscribers, and I don't care
Mhm.
enough to. It doesn't fucking matter. Whoever, do you know the last time you looked at an RSS feed for a podcast and like read it? Like it doesn't matter.
Mm,
But I eventually changed it because I realized, like, as that whole milieu fell apart, and the format of what I was doing changed, that anybody that was reachable in that fan base had already kind of moved on. There wasn't really a need for what I was trying to do. And I was like, you
hmm.
know what? I've kind of been doing this long enough that I know what I'm doing. I'll um I'll rebrand and I'll just be me on the internet. To answer your question about why I like to podcast and I shifted from doing essays to long form interviews, it was actually COVID that made me do that switch, because I was working nights as a paramedic when I started. And even in a relatively large metropolitan area like I live, excuse me, I got to caffeinate.
Mm,
Um, Even in a relatively large metropolitan area like I live, at night, when you're working EMS like 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., from like midnight to 6 a.m., you maybe run like one or two calls. And I had plenty of time where I could sit and I could read like dense books, like really like get
hmm.
into like an academic text
Mhm.
and like research an essay that I was going to write. And then I could write the essay at work. So I basically did all that at work and then had my days off to do whatever I wanted. And then COVID happened. And then I did not stop moving for the entire 12-hour shift that I was working. So I could no longer do that. I was like, well, at the end of the day, I had to quit writing. And at the end of the day, I realized I'm not the sort of person for whom writing like a long-winded essay is necessarily the best thing to be doing anyway. I don't have the credentials for that. Nobody's going to give a shit what I personally think. But like you said, I'm fairly inquisitive. I can carry on a conversation reasonably well. I ask decent questions. What I should do, what I could do, is create an interview format where I bring on interesting people and I pick their brains about stuff. And in the course of that conversation, I explore my own ideas with them. And maybe
Hmm.
that will be productive and help other people. And I can bring on people who I really agree with, and explore their ideas, or I can bring on people who I like kind of tangentially agree with, and maybe we can see where our values align, like you and Frost and people like that. And it's basically I just kind of fell into my own. It started as I want to get the fuck out of my job and make a decent living. And then it became I'm never going to make money at this under any circumstances. It's just like I've been doing this 2 years and I'm probably like $1,000 in the red in terms of like hosting and what have you. I was like, this is just a project that I do because I like it and it gives me access to talk to people that otherwise wouldn't return my DMs.
Yeah, interesting. I guess I'm that way a little bit too. I mean, I don't expect. To me, it's a side project. I just
Mhm.
enjoy talking with people and learning about them. But I'm not so sure that your podcast will stay that way. It just, I don't know. It's just so random. You just don't know what could happen. You know,
Yeah.
you might have a conversation with someone, and then it goes viral, and then it just snowballs from there. You just never know if you keep at it. I actually don't want that to happen with me. I don't think that would work given my job. But I like the fact that I have a small podcast where
Yeah.
just people I know kind of talk with me. But yeah, no, I mean, I think you got something really cool going on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think so. There's a space. You mentioned that, how you originally started, the folks that you could reach, I kind of moved on. I think there's a space for independent people on the left to build an audience. So the big podcasts, if I'm kind of, I might be wrong about this. You can let me know if you think the same. There are big podcasts on the left and the right, but the big podcasts on the left tend to be almost institutional in a way. Like they're coming from, some well-known person who works at the Atlantic or CNN or something
Mhm.
like that. You got that on the right, but you also have big independent right, like the Sam Harris type. He's not affiliated with any kind of institution. Joe
Mhm.
Rogan, of course, is the paradigmatic example.
Right.
I don't know if there's anything like that. The Weinsteins, of course,
Mhm.
all these kind of IDW types. I don't know if there's anything comparable on the left.
So the reason I laughed a little bit is when you said institutionally on the left, and when you describe the left, your first go was to CNN or the Atlantic, and that is not
Maybe not. Okay, center. There's centers.
when I think of the left in terms of and this is just a breakdown in terminology that I think happens in American political discourse.
Okay.
Like I talked about this in my episode with Ina, like Nice Mangoes, which will be coming out in a couple months. But to the extent that I don't even know that left and right are like useful terms anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But like when I think left, I think like my left, which is like commies and anarchists. And
I see. Yes, the
so like when
far left, I
yeah,
guess would
like when
be.
I think big name left podcasts, I think like uh, well, now I'm gonna blank on his name. The Behind the Bastards guy, Robert
Okay.
something or other. Why am I blanking on his name? He's like the biggest like left wing journalist on the planet. Hold on, I have to look
Wow, I don't know this guy. I guess I should know him.
it up. Behind the Bastards. Uh, Robert Evans is the guy. Robert Evans. Um, Behind the Bastards is Robert is an anarchist, and he's like he does his podcast is about he investigates like horrible people in history and then describes how they became horrible people. It's a very good series. Um, in
Hmm.
terms of And yeah, you're right though. That's like probably the biggest one, at least that I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would be remiss if I didn't shout out. I don't speak German. Those guys, Jack and Daniel. Um,
Harper, right? Isn't
mhm.
Daniel Harper's one? Yeah, yeah. He
Yeah,
doesn't. He
Jack
doesn't
Graham
like
and
me
Daniel.
anymore. Which is
Yeah,
actually a good segue to what we to describing our politics. But
sure. Yeah,
okay, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So okay, I take your point that when I'm saying left, I'm probably talking more about people who would vote Democrat.
Hmm.
And maybe even center left kind of folks. And then a lot of times when people say left, they're really talking about socialists and people
Hmm.
more progressive than the folks I'm talking about. Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. Well, then, how would you describe your politics?
Um, so I've been working on my elevator pitch, right? And I've been trying not to use scary words like communism or socialism or anything like that. Um, because I mean, I think it's fair to describe me as a socialist. I have used the term libertarian socialist in the past,
Hmm.
though that has some connotations to it that, like, if I were to sit down with an actual, like, anarchist and have a conversation, there would be things we would disagree about. But, um, and I'm also not well read enough in like the canon of leftist theory to really tell you like where I fall one way or another in terms of what political ideology I would cleave to most. But here's what I think.
Hmm.
I think that every human being, just by virtue of being a human being, should have equal access, equal and uninhibited access to all of the things that are necessary for survival and meaningful participation in their society, which would include, to my mind, at a minimum, housing, sustenance, transportation, education, medical care, and communication. Right? Those things you should, just because you live in whatever the base level of those things that your society can provide so that you can not die of exposure, not die of starvation, not die of medical a lack of access to medical care, and that you have some level of meaningful ability to interact with the people around you by virtue of your access to communication and the ability to enrich yourself intellectually and participate in that culture, right? You should have those things provided
Hmm.
for you at no cost to yourself. Like, be you not even just like if you're an invalid who's incapable of working, just like if you decide you don't want to do anything productive, right? You still get those things. Just period. That's
Okay.
just the base level of human dignity, right? Um, I think most people would choose to do something productive if they thought it could get them more than the base level.
Hmm.
And that's a
Hmm.
whole separate conversation. But just every human being gets those things. And that we should have the smallest possible state or government apparatus that is necessary to achieve the thing that I just described.
Wait a minute, Mr. Edwards,
Hmm.
if I may.
Hmm.
You started by describing what I think would require a massive expansion in our government.
I said the smallest possible. I did. I didn't say absent. And I actually think that we. I think that we get lost in the weeds a bit in terms of like big and small government.
Hmm.
Um, when I think of what a state should be, right? It has, if a state is to exist, if this thing, this leviathan that exists independent of the people, is to exist in the world, then it should exist solely to facilitate the things that I've just described and to prevent the people within it from infringing on the rights of other people to obtain those things. And that actually doesn't require, in my view, a very large system. You need a system of taxation, you need a legal system, and then you need a social services system that provides those things. I think we could actually do away with quite a bit of bureaucracy and administrative overhead and still have the things I just described. The problem is not the size of the government. The problem is capitalism. The problem is that capitalism breeds
Mm.
bureaucracy because capitalism requires that there be an employee-employer relationship, and that constant expansion, which requires the constant creation of jobs that are unnecessary within a bureaucratic system. It is my view that in order
Huh.
to achieve
That's
the thing I just
really.
described, we have
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah, yeah,
eliminate the
yeah.
private ownership of the means of wealth generation and production, because to attempt to achieve what I just described via a capitalist system would, in fact, result in a massive government system. It would also not happen at all because if you provide people with their basic necessities, some number of them are going to choose not to consume, and capitalism requires ever increasing, expansive levels of production or of consumption. Um, so I think that we should have all those things, and we should
Uh-huh.
have the smallest government possible to get them, whatever that winds up being. And I think the roadblock to achieving what I said
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is capitalism.
That's really something. It's like turning the normal assumptions on its head. So you were saying, if I could pick out a little bit of it, that the employer employee relationship is what generates all that bureaucracy. And so if we removed capitalism, private ownership of things, that would then reduce all the bureaucracy. In my head, I'm thinking that more private ownership means less rules because the government is not in that
Well,
relationship
well,
anymore.
does it though? Right? Like have you ever worked for a corporation? Would you describe that situation as being absent of rules?
Those are certainly rules in a corporation. Yes,
Yeah, I mean, like
voluntary. I
40
mean, you could leave the corporation.
and then die. You have the freedom to work for a private entity or starve. That's hardly freedom in my view.
Now, this we agree on. I'm not even disagreeing with what you're
Yeah.
saying earlier. It's just that it was new, and so I just
Yeah.
wanted to kind of push back to get a sense of where you're coming from. I am one of those people who also believe that it's more important, if I
Mhm.
have to create a hierarchy, um, to for freedom from things
Mhm.
and not freedom to do things, right? So freedom from hunger, freedom from
Mhm.
homelessness, and freedom from fear, I think, or something
Mhm.
like. So you need a police force. I think is important, but not. But I think conservatives would argue for the freedom to thing, freedom to start a business, freedom to carry a gun, or whatever it might
Mhm.
be. I don't know. So I guess in some ways we agree on that. So you're describing your politics, and it's very interesting. I mean, if I would have paid more attention to your past podcasts, I'm sure that came up in the past, and I could have developed questions to talk about this further instead of it coming towards the end because it's really interesting. Now, you don't want to call that socialism or communism,
Well, I'm perfectly happy to call it some variant of socialism or communism, right? Like, I just tend not to lead with that,
right?
because
Because it would push
yeah,
people away. Yeah,
yeah. Like, I mean, by definition, right? I want to do away with. I think the primary impediment. So I agree with most of what you just said, sans the police force thing, but that's a
yeah.
whole rabbit hole. We don't have to get into that. Um, I am if not an abolitionist, then the amount of daylight between myself and a police abolitionist is so narrow as to not be worth parsing over until we've come a long way. But we can put a pin in that. We don't have to. It's a whole fucking rabbit hole. We're just in terms of basic political ideology. I largely agree with what you said. Um, I think the impediment to that is that singular individuals and corporate entities are capable of owning the mechanisms that are capable of generating wealth in our society. I think that those things, the systems of wealth generation, should be collectivized. And by definition, that is some variant of socialism or communism. And the way I think about it, not always, but the way I think about it when I'm talking to liberals, and I use that word in the classical sense when I'm talking about to people who believe in, classical liberal ideas like democracy and what have you.
Mhm.
The whole liberal project was to take power that was vested in the hands of a small group of people and dissolve that amongst the populace. It was political power. Well, they did that arguably. I would say that they didn't fully succeed, but they achieved it to some regard. They dissolved it amongst the bourgeois class, the private own. They dissolved it amongst people who were capable of privately owning those things.
Mhm.
We transitioned from mercantilism to capitalism, and now we are in a situation where we have, theoretically, at least on paper, we have democratic control of our political structures. But the thing that is the most important in our lives, you don't really make contact with the political apparatus that you exist within very often. What you make contact with, what actually affects your day-to-day life at a material level, is the economic system that you live in. And we have no control over that as private citizens. And so what I want to do is to extend that liberalizing project and dissolve the economic power within the populace as well. I want to do both.
Okay, is there a politician that we might know
Mhm.
that you support over others?
Um, I mean, I was a Bernie guy,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
I think Bernie watered down his message a bit in order to play in American electoral politics. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Bernie was a member of the DSA at one point before he became an independent. Um, so I believe Bernie is a socialist, but Bernie did not present himself as a socialist. I I'm actually not a huge follower of electoral politics in America. I have a bit more of a radical view on that. I
Mhm,
think
mhm, mhm.
largely the American electoral political system has been co-opted by capitalism and is not an effective way to get our demands met. I don't think that we're going to be able to achieve the things I've described electorally, at least not purely electorally. I'm not familiar with any politician like the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, is a political party that is socialist in name, and they're an electoral. Their focus is electoral politics. So anybody out there who wants to vote their way into socialism, go check them out. But
Yeah, yeah.
I fundamentally believe we're going to need a bottom up like revolution. Whether that is a bloody one or not is dependent, in my view, on how much the capitalists resist.
I see. Interesting. I think that we will have changes in the future, but it won't be. I don't think it'll be violent. I think what'll happen is what I would call cohort effects. Like you've got
Mhm,
people of a different generation who are experiencing the world in a different way, and then when they get into positions of power, they will start affecting change. We're
mhm,
kind of seeing that now. Like
mhm,
this whole woke, anti-woke thing is because you've got people in their 20s and 30s who grew up in a different world than
mhm,
people who are in their 50s and 60s. And so they're writing things that people my age and above are like, what is going on? What are you saying here? But for those kids, it's like, or young people, I guess, it's just life. Of course, there's white privilege. Of course, there's, gender fluidity. What's wrong with you, 50 plus person? And so I think that's kind of what's happening. And so I think that people of a younger generation aren't as enamored with capitalism and this idea of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be the big entrepreneur. There's still some of that, right? It's a
mhm,
big culture, but I don't think it's the same. So when those folks get in positions to vote for certain things, if a Bernie Sanders comes along in 10, 15 years, that person might get a little bit more play than Bernie Sanders is now. He's just the right guy at the wrong time, I believe.
yeah, I had hope for that previously, but the
Oh.
timeline is so normally I would agree with you, and I actually have almost this exact conversation, an ongoing conversation with a very close friend of mine, Anthony, and he's said similar things to me, and I agree, right? Like, at a certain point, what is necessary for culture change is for old people to die, right? Like,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, social progress is made one headstone at a time, like, to be very goth about it. Like, y at a certain point, just the people that would like there's one of my favorite pictures for grim reasons is, the that photo of the sit-in at the lunch counter in, I believe, North Carolina, the the black students that were sitting at the
At the
whites only.
Woolworths counter. Yep, yep,
Yeah,
yep.
at the
That's in
Woolworths.
North Carolina. Mhm.
I look at that picture and I look at all the jeering white people standing around them, and all I see are Congress people, right? Like,
Hmm.
all those people are who they're Mitch McConnell's age, right? They're the people that currently have the reins of power.
Mhm, mhm.
They didn't get better. They didn't, like, have come to Jesus moments. They became Republicans or Democrats. Some of those people are your Joe Bidens, right? Um,
Right, yeah,
we're
yeah, I can
not
see
gonna
that,
make
yeah, mhm.
progress until those people are dead, basically, right? That's
Mhm,
in terms of electoral politics, the older generation holds power. They are the people that were throwing batteries and cans of soup at people at Martin Luther King and his delegation, right? They were the people that were they were clapping while their cop dads sicked um, German shepherds on those folks, right? You at a certain
mhm.
point, you're not gonna you're just we're not gonna pull those people back. We're not gonna change their hearts and minds. We're just waiting on them to no longer have power. Um, so to a certain extent, I agree with you.
Yeah,
The,
yeah. The
the
data says that now. I mean,
Yeah.
if you like, I think the Pew did a survey, Pew Research Center, asking about socialism for young folks and their belief in capitalism, and they're really compared to prior generations. They're not as positive about it, capitalism, and they're more positive about socialism. So, I mean, there's some hope. I, I,
Well,
w-
so the part where I break from you and
uh-huh.
where I take that data to be not hopeful is that we're rapidly approaching an actual ecological catastrophe that is going to uh, hyper focus all of the negative aspects of our political and economic systems, right? We're what I can't remember what the estimate is, but it's like 15 to 20 years away from huge swaths of the equatorial region being uninhabitable for human life. Like, we're
Okay.
we're rapidly approaching an actual ecological catastrophe. We're
Hmm.
going to have huge migrations of dark-skinned people moving into predominantly white-skinned countries. There's going to be a reduction of resources, and capitalism is going to go into decline because it is no longer capable of expanding. And that is a perfect recipe for something called eco-fascism. um, Tucker Carlson, who is the most watched pundit in America right now, is actively promoting the Great Replacement theory
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
priming a huge chunk of America to say, well, you know what? Maybe we actually do have to do something about this global warming thing, but only for us. You know who us is, right? Right? That's what
Uh-huh.
I'm worried about. It's not that I don't think people generationally change. It's that we actually have a ticking clock on when that change needs to take place before we're all living in like a Mad Max dystopia with Lord Humongous standing outside telling us to walk away from the gasoline with Tucker Carlson sitting there as his little rent boy that he's petting. Like, like it's the ticking clock that makes me a
Uh-huh.
bit more twitchy about how quickly we need to move and what methods we may need to deploy in that movement.
I see. So, on my politics has shifted a little bit. I don't know if they're more to the left or right. They just changed a little bit. My lens for seeing the world has changed. But this conversation has not touched on that at all because we've been talking more about class-based things. And I think
Mhm.
that's kind of where I was like real world issues, not I'm not saying that the culture war issues are not important. I think that they're just a higher level and not as interesting or meaningful, I should say. It's interesting to a lot of people, but not as meaningful to people in the everyday lives, in their everyday lives. And so that's kind of what I'm always griping about. And But
Mhm.
this is quite different,
So I
and this has been
fundamentally
fun.
disagree with what you just said. The
Wait a
the
minute, we just spent the whole time talking about
right,
class-based issues. Okay.
right. Well, so here's the thing. I don't think that you can separate class from identity. Like I don't think that you can set, and I can prove
Uh-huh.
it to you. Um,
Okay.
we just went through, and when I had you on my podcast, it was largely to discuss this critical race theory moral panic, right,
Mhm.
which is a cultural issue. Um, what has been the domino effect of that movement since we last spoke? We had the critical race theory moral panic, which led to teachers now being fired in some instances for teaching Martin Luther King Jr.,
Mhm, mhm,
which snowballed very quickly into a trans moral panic, which overnight is now a complete anti-queer moral
that's
panic.
right, right, right.
And teachers are not allowed to say my husband if they're men. And what this does, it's always, this is the conversation every time, is we can't talk, we need to not focus on the cultural stuff. We need to focus on the class stuff. And the problem is that the cultural stuff is a wedge issue. It's a, we'll give you everything you want if you just sacrifice this tiny
Right.
population of people and their rights. And then you do, and then you don't get everything that you want. They go after another population of people. So that's why, aside from the fact that it's just the right thing to do, one of the reasons that I'm so vocally a proponent of trans rights is because trans rights are a wedge issue that the fascists, to be perfectly frank, like Chris
Mhm.
Rufo and James Lindsay and all of their ilk, will always use every time to go, well, you gave us an inch on this. Now we're going to go after all the gay people. Now we're going to go after black people. And before you know it, we're in the same socioeconomic situations we were prior to Reconstruction because they use those class issues to mobilize middle class people who are actively anxious about their situation and want to over that's how fascism works, right? It's not a bottom up grassroots movement. It's a movement of the middle class who are reactionaries who ape working class rhetoric um, and convince other people in the middle class that they need to turn against the most marginalized people in their community in order to secure the things that they need for them. And who
Mhm.
they are is a cone that narrows and narrows and narrows until it's just people that look like me.
Okay. Well, all right. I would not have framed these culture war issues in their function the way you would. I would see it as, look, you've got a lot of potential voters out there who,
Mm,
they might have some views about trans folks, they might have some views about black folks, some views about women, but finally what they're most interested in is their everyday pay, whether or
mhm,
not they can send their kids to school. And so you have these people out there who would likely be interested, some of them, not all, voting for Democrats. I won't say left now, I'll use different terms, voting Democrat. But because you've taken this view about trans and black folk and women and call them bigots because they don't agree exactly with you, they're not voting for you. You're losing those folks. Like this is my understanding.
I actually don't. So I've heard that repeated. I've not seen that borne out in data. I don't know that what you just said is true.
Well, if you look at the any kind
Like,
of
do we
polling,
have actual numbers on people who have switched their votes from Democrat to Republican because the left was too, like, didn't want to, like, how many people voted
mhm,
Republican because the Democrats didn't want conversion therapy to be a thing?
that's
Like,
right.
I don't actually think that's a real thing. I think that that's a canard that gets brought up and doesn't actually exist. And if I'm wrong about that, then I'm wrong about it, but, like, I've never
Mhm.
seen data on it.
I haven't seen data on anything that we're
Yeah.
saying. I'm kind of talking more in terms of just human behavior and why people vote, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
sure, you're going to have a bunch of um, people who really are. Christians
Mhm.
or feel like the world is changing. It doesn't matter what you say about the economy. They're still going to vote for the politician, the Ron DeSantis type person who's saying, we're not going to have these queers talking about gay stuff in our schools. I mean, that's true. But I mean, come on, people are complex. I mean, they can weigh something and go, all right, this politician is working hard to raise my minimum wage.
Mhm. So I
I'll
don't
vote for that
actually
person,
know any. I mean, again, I don't think that those two things are um, incompatible with one another. Like, I personally don't know anybody who is actively a proponent of trans rights and gay like general like LGBTQ
Mhm.
rights, or who is a proponent of anti-racism, who is against a higher minimum wage. I think it is
Right.
fundamentally a lie that is perpetuated by the right wing, that if we, and to a lesser extent class reductionist lefties, who are like, we can't focus on this cultural stuff because it's distracting the middle class, or the working class. Like, the guy in the factory doesn't care about pronouns, he just wants to have better health care. And I think that to a certain extent, I'm of two minds about that. Number one, I
Mhm.
think that's incredibly insulting to the people that work in the factory, that we think that they're so simple-minded that they can't maintain two separate thoughts in their heads at once.
Mhm.
Um, Number two, I think that it's not true, because we don't actually have a left political movement in this country that actually addresses their needs in any meaningful way. What we have is a fascist party. The Republican Party is basically just openly fascist at this point, and it's aping working class language, and it's giving the um your Tucker Carlsons, your Sagar and Jetties, like all these people who are like, we need health care for us. We need, workers' rights for the right workers. Those people. Um,
Mhm.
and then we have the left like the Democrats, who are a capitalist party, who aren't doing anything for the working class. They're not even aping working class language at all. And what they're doing
Right.
is they're pushing corporate identity politics as a substitute for actual class change. And that, I think, is fucked up and wrong. And it's why I'm not a Democrat. Fuck the Democrats. I hate them. I don't want them to be in power. The problem is that those two things are not like the extent of the political structure that you could have. And what we need is the Democrats to we either need the Democrats to start pushing actual, like, working class political agendas, where they actually go after health care and um, low wages, and promoting unions and all these other things that I, as a dirty communist, would want them to do, um, in addition to promoting these more identity-based social movements. Um, or we just need, communists to take power, which I would be all in favor of. But the problem is that it's a false dichotomy. You're presenting it as an either or, not necessarily you personally, but just the way it's presented is, we have to focus on working class economic agenda, or we have to focus on the identity part. We don't have a party that's picking and choosing. We have a party that has decided to fake its way through the most surface level id pull bullshit possible, just enough to please its corporate masters.
Mhm.
And if the Democrats, I promise you, if the Democrats just added the economic part to their agenda, they would get the factory worker. That factory worker would not give a shit about the fact that they're also promoting trans rights, because the Democrats would actively be pursuing a minimum wage on top of it. It's not that the woke is exclusionary to economic concerns. It's that the woke is used as a smokescreen to promote a capitalist agenda for the Democrats. It's a corrosive, regressive ideology. Your problem is not with the left. Your problem is with the Democrats, one that I share.
Okay. So
Sorry, I went
just
on a rant there, but
that's fine. I wanted you to, tell me
I
what
would
you think
actually
about these
encourage
things.
you, have you read, I haven't read his book yet, but did you ever read, Elite Capture by Olufemi Taiwo?
No, everyone keeps talking about that piece, but no, I've never read it.
Yeah, it's a very good piece that like I think highlights a lot of what I just described.
Okay. Um, well, actually, I agree with you that what the left needs to do, Democrats need to do, is talk more about working class, about economic
Mhm,
issues, and that's kind of my concern. I don't think that by saying that the factory worker cares more about his wages is insulting. I'm just saying that people have priorities, and so
mhm,
I mean that's their priority. In fact, if I go to my hometown in South Carolina, no one is talking about anything on Twitter.
mhm,
Like no one. Sometimes my mom, who spends too many hours in front of CNN or MSNBC, she'll say something that Rachel Maddow says, but finally, that's just not her concern.
yeah,
So I mean that's kind of what I mean.
right,
Um, when I say those things. So I agree with a lot of what you said actually, in terms of in addition to, not either
mm,
or. So yeah, sure, man. I mean, let's
yeah,
put more Joe Biden or some designated leader of the party should really start hammering
mhm,
hard on economic issues, not just saying, "Oh, here's the infrastructure bill and this
mhm,
is what's in it, the Build Back Better bill, I guess I should say," and then let the narrative go from there. No, no, no. Make that like the main thing you're talking about all the time. And then in addition with that, we can also deal with other issues of inequality,
mhm,
which would be the racial
yeah,
and gender inequality. No, I get it. It's just that, man, I don't know. Maybe you and I see different things, but when I'm on Twitter,
mhm,
my mutuals
mhm,
are like aliens from another planet, and I mean this in the nicest way.
yeah. Well,
What are they talking about all the time? What
well,
is
I
this?
I actually so this is the thing, I don't actually know what you mean because we share a lot of mutuals.
Uh-huh.
I've got feet in different worlds on Twitter, and, so number 1, just to be perfectly frank, I think some of the stuff you post on Twitter is incredibly reductive and, is designed to be inflammatory and,
Oh yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
like, I think that you're like the progressive there's a tweet thread that you posted about how you presume progressives think, and it just made me think you don't actually know how progressives think because everything that you said was wrong.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think you responded to that one. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
it like, it's something about, like, progressives believe that if people aren't saying things that they're not thinking it, and that so our goal is to get them to stop saying things so they stop thinking it, and
Oh,
that's just
absolutely. That's
yeah, that's
ridiculous what they did
completely
with the
wrong.
free speech thing. That's what I see, man. That's what I see.
No,
Yeah,
no, no,
I
so
mean, come on, man. Let people talk. What you think if you
well,
stop
so
them from
that's
saying bigoted things, they don't think it. I mean, that's
no,
stupid.
nobody thinks that. No, nobody believes that. I don't want
Then
people
let
to say
people talk.
well, I
Well,
want
why would you
people to
stop?
not say bigoted I mean, sure, you can talk, but I'm going to say
Uh-huh.
that what you said is shitty. I don't want people to say bigoted things not because I think that if they stop saying bigoted things, they'll become better people. I've just spent a good amount of time saying that I think sometimes the only way people become better is when they die.
Mhm.
So I obviously don't think that um, just abstaining from expressing your opinion changes the way you think. And nor do I know any single human being who identifies as a progressive that actually thinks that way. We want people to stop saying bigoted things because when people say bigoted things, it hurts people's feelings and that's bad. And then if enough people say bigoted things, it leads to politicians weaponizing that bigotry to create bigoted legislation that materially hurts marginalized people.
Mhm.
That's the reason.
Okay.
Like, if enough people say, make the helicopter joke about trans people, then eventually trans people don't get protection under the law because we've normalized anti-trans thinking in the public discourse and that can be weaponized and it hurts my friends' feelings. Those are the reasons I don't like that being expressed. And I don't think you should go to jail for it for saying
Mhm.
it, but I am going to call you an asshole if you say it because you're being an asshole, right? Like if that's kind of where it is. Like we're in a public space and
Mhm.
you're voicing your opinion and you have no right to expect somebody not to clap back on that opinion if they think it's fucking stupid,
Mhm.
right? If you don't feel like engaging with people throwing smoke, stay off Twitter, right? That's basically what it is. It's not that I think you're going to be a different human being if you keep your mouth shut. It's I want you to keep your mouth shut because I don't want you to hurt my friends' feelings and I don't want enough people to say the dumb shit that you just said that it becomes possible for that to materially impact my friend's well-being. That's it.
Okay, fair enough. So the end game is the same, just the motivations are different. You want that person to be quiet, but for different reasons.
Yeah, no, I absolutely want bigots to shut the fuck up.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
And
Well,
I would
you
actually
know.
argue I think you do as well in most situations. Um,
Well, actually, what has happened is I realized that because what seems to be bigoted is almost anything that doesn't fit within a narrow space. I've decided
mm,
to kind of ease up on calling people racist and sexist and stuff. I just don't think that's right. I think people aren't trying to be racist, even if they're unintentionally doing it. It's
yeah.
counterproductive to call them bigot because it's got this moral evaluation with it. So just stop with that mess, man. Like, it's just not
So
necessary. So
so I will say that I think there is, and this is I would agree with a point that you made earlier, much earlier in the conversation, that this is a generational thing that is difficult to parse for people who are not enmeshed within this particular culture of, call it wokeness, call it whatever you want,
mhm.
where in the circles I travel in, there, I'm gonna. How much time do we have? Because I can actually lay this out in a fairly,
Well,
in a
we've
way that
gone
makes
past
sense.
my 60-minute limit, but this
Sorry.
is very interesting. So just
Okay.
keep going. It's fine. It's
So
cool. It's
so
cool.
th I'm gonna describe 2 sets of phenomena, and this is also, I think, at the bottom of what we were talking about earlier, where the difference between, actual working class movements like socialist and communist-based movements and the Democrats who are a corporate party who ape that language. Keep that distinction in mind as I'm talking. Um, so on the one hand, you have a group of people who, your latter day social justice warriors, right? Your wokies, your whatever you want to call them, right? Your
Mhm.
hippy dippy, lovey dovey, bisexual lighting folks like me. Um, the word bigotry for us does not necessarily come with an automatic moral condemnation in terms of essentializing it to the person who is displaying bigoted behavior. So if let's say I do like a microaggression or something, right? Like we're talking and I'm like, hey Rod, you're actually very eloquent, right? You speak very, like something that would
I
is
see.
is
Yes. Yes.
right. It's
Surprising that a black person could be
yeah,
articulate.
right.
Yes,
I
I
say
got it.
something like that, and then you say, hey man, um, that's actually kind of offensive. It's racist, right? It is a racist thing that I said.
Hmm.
Um, and this is why, and I'd like you to stop saying it. Now, I hear you say that, and I'm gonna be a little flustered, and right, ideally that would be something that would be done in private. And but I am not going to automatically assume that you think I'm a terrible person for having said that, because you care enough to tell me about it, which means you're interested in maintaining our relationship and you're interested in me being a better person because you want that behavior to stop. So what you're saying is the thing that you said is racist, Mark. You're not saying, Mark, you are a racist and a bad person. Does that distinction
Oh,
make sense?
sure. The action versus
Hmm.
who you are as a person. Yeah.
Hmm.
No. No. I mean I get it. You are doing something and you're doing something and you
Yeah.
yourself are. No. No. I get it. I
And
get it.
so most of the time, and this gets fucked up on Twitter because again, Twitter's a public space and people, even on my tribe, sometimes especially in my tribe on Twitter, the it gets loud and messy and there's dog piling and discourse gets fucked up. But how it really works, and I've had these conversations like IRL, like with people about stuff, and it's generally a hey, you did something bigoted in some way, you should stop. That's it. And and that's the extent of the conversation. And then I as a person will go, okay, maybe I don't agree with you even, but I'm going to think about it, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it later, and then you change your behavior and so on. And then it only turns into you're actually a racist and a piece of shit if that happens over and over and over and over again, and you refuse to change your behavior for whatever reason. That's
Mhm.
a cultural thing, right? And I think when people who are a little older, even in my generation, this is mostly like a Gen Z thing. Like I just swim in that circle, in that sea a little bit, so I'm more exposed to it than I think a lot of elder millennials like myself are. So like older millennials, Gen Xers, I think when they get called or they have somebody say, hey, the thing you just said is racist, or the thing you just said is transphobic, or the thing you just said is X type of bigotry, what they hear is, you're a racist, you're a transphobe, you're a bigot, you're a piece of shit. And that's
Mhm.
not what that person is saying to you. They're saying something very different. And so there's a communication gap there. And that's where a lot of that problem comes from, is somebody assuming that somebody who is describing a behavior is describing the person in an essentialist fashion. So that's a distinction that I think gets lost generationally. And then the other part of it that makes this even more fucking complicated is corporate identity politics and the Democrats. And those folks,
What?
like, is is your K hives and your rainbow capitalist
What's a K
dipshit.
hive?
The Kamala Harris, like the K hive, the K hive is like the people that are really into Kamala Harris.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. But basically, like your rainbow capitalism, like rah rah rah, we're all going to put pronouns in our bio and then bomb all the people who disagree with us. Those folks, who I fucking hate, and most other legit
Well,
lefties
come on
do
now.
as
It sounds
well.
like you're agreeing with some of what I'm saying,
So
Mark.
I that's the thing, is they will adopt the social, like the social justicey, wokey, whatever. I don't know what the actual term is. They'll adopt that
Mhm, mhm,
language and weaponize it against people that they disagree with in a way to make a power play that doesn't actually benefit the marginalized people that they are saying that they are doing that for. That again, I think is largely the subject, or at least tangentially the subject of Taiwo's piece, and other work on that subject. But that is a fucking problem, and I completely agree with you about that. And I hate those people as much, if not more, than you do, because they make it impossible for me to say the first part of the thing that I said in the last 15 minutes without people rolling their eyes at me because they think that I'm one of them. Does that make sense?
hmm.
There's the core group of people who are actually working in good faith to try and make the people around them better. And there's just a cultural difference that sometimes it doesn't come across. And
Mhm.
then there's this other group of people who are your liberal id pol rainbow capitalist folks who weaponize that language to achieve their own ends, without actually doing anything to materially support the people that that language was created to benefit. And that's where, and
Okay.
it turns into this soup that's just a huge fucking problem. And that is a problem, and it's something that really bears deep discussion, far more than I can provide. Like, I'm a fucking moron. Like, I can't parse that any further than I've just parsed it, and it needs to be really dived into in a very sensitive way that I'm just not capable of. um, but it gets reduced down to, very often, and what I took issue with a lot of your tweets was, you are seeing the, in many ways, the corporate id pol stuff, and seeing that behavior be reflected on the legitimate people who are trying to do actual genuine social work with the language that they developed for that purpose. And it's not necessarily your fault, because on Twitter the two groups overlap in ways that are difficult to tell apart, and it's just
Hmm.
it's a mess. It's a
Interesting.
fucking mess.
Well, okay, fair enough. I certainly think that there are people who are virtue signaling. I don't know, man. I feel like it's a little deeper than that, but I mean, I like the
In
explanation.
what way?
Well, because it's not just that. I mean, you're right about that. There's some people who are just sort of, just virtue signaling, just kind of, going through the motions and then calling people bigots to make themselves look good, I guess. And then there are people who are actually trying to make the world a better place. Yep, yep, yep. I get that. But I think for all of those folks, there's this sense of moral superiority and rightness. And because they tend to, actually, this is for the right and left, this part, tend to talk to each other, they can reinforce their own sense of moral superiority and
Mhm,
rightness. So someone comes in with a slightly different view that's not incorrect at all. That person is, they think that person's saying something crazy and they're not. They're
mhm,
just the average person. So for example, I talked to Frost last week in my live stream, and we are talking about body positivity.
mhm,
The average person in the United States is not going to go apoplectic if you say, look, there is a kind of general relationship between health and weight. You go on Twitter, then you're going to get people saying that you're fat shaming, that you got some personal issue with fat people, on and on and on, which is crazy. And that happens because there's in that space on
mhm.
Twitter with these very leftist people talking amongst each other, and I don't
Yeah,
know what
I
to
mean
do
the
about that.
the body positivity thing is a very difficult one to parse for a number of reasons. I think that there are a lot of d- we could spend hours talking
Yeah,
about
no,
that,
no, okay.
but just specifically to talk about what you're
It's a
talking about.
phenomenon. So
Yeah,
you could do that with trans issues too. I,
yeah, yeah,
I I don't want to just make a point
yeah.
about body positivity. I'm saying that that's just how it works for all of these topics.
Hmm.
Very narrow understanding, and if you fall outside of that, then all of a sudden you're a bad person, or you're just something's wrong with you.
Yeah, I mean, like I've had this is this is gonna sound really dismissive, but like maybe
Dismiss,
maybe
please.
just don't give a shit what, like, 300 follower accounts on Twitter say, right? Like,
Yeah,
I've
that's
been put
true.
on lists by like, lists on Twitter by other lefties calling me a CIA shill because I said that I'm maybe, don't think that we should completely dissolve the state immediately, right? Like, it's at a certain point, you just have to recognize that the people that are saying all of that stuff are just angry people who are expressing their opinions, and Twitter's not real life and it doesn't fucking matter. And if you're actually forming if you're forming core coherent political and social beliefs based on what um you know woke Randy 23566WX on Twitter said about you that was mean, you've lost the plot in a very serious way. um
Mm,
like
fair
I just
enough.
like,
Okay.
and I would, like, I've encountered people who like are, gonna like to use the term, I don't like using the term, but we'll just use it, virtue signal. Yeah, yeah, of course those people exist. I don't care. Like, like who gives a shit?
Mhm.
Like, a lot of them are probably kids. A lot of them are probably just like, it's just somebody angry on their phone who like stubbed their toe at a bus stop and they want to take it out on you. And, yeah, you're not righteous enough for their take. There is a deeper issue with what you said at the start, which I think I might disagree with you on, which is that everybody you're sort of like taking a 10,000-yard view of like, well, everybody thinks that they're morally superior to everybody else and
Oh
that
yeah.
their
Oh
view
yeah.
right.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And of course I think I'm morally superior to the people I disagree with. My morals are correct. like like
It
I
doesn't have to be like that, though. I mean, you
well, I
could
mean it
say that a person just has different political views. You don't have to
well, it
say that,
when their
the
different
person's bad.
political when their different political views result in segregation or conversion therapy or genocidal policies against women or trans
Mhm.
people, then yeah, I'm perfectly comfortable saying that I'm morally superior to them. And if you think that the laws that resulted in somebody potentially getting charged with murder for having an abortion, uh, are okay, I think you're morally wrong, and I
Mhm.
disagree with you so strongly that, like, some moral disagreements, like, result in violence, and I think that's appropriate. That's what wars are about. We fought several. We fought one over slavery. We fought one over fascism. You know, I think I'm morally superior to Nazis, and I don't have a problem saying that. I think I'm morally superior to Republicans, and I don't have a problem saying that. And I think it's really weird to think that I shouldn't.
I see. Yeah, no, I mean, that might be reductive, maybe in a way, in the sense that the person who might disagree with you, there are a constellation of things, and like, so for example, I want to reform the police.
Mhm.
Okay, maybe a person is a law and order guy, and I'm thinking in my head, all right, that's going to actually hurt a lot of people, a lot of poor people, a lot of people of color, but you taking that stance. But I understand that that person has a different set of
Mhm.
values, different experiences, and like, all right, I don't like this dude, but let's go have a beer or something. Like, I'm not going to necessarily see him. Like, it takes something stronger for me
Mhm.
to take that, because you're right. People, you can see people as you can see yourself as morally superior in a lot of instances, but I just think it's for so many things now,
Mhm.
and it's kind of a cancer
So
in our society.
it becomes a problem when you're trying to work towards compromise, right? And it becomes a problem when you're trying to convert people, right? If I
Mhm,
think I'm morally I get what you're saying, but I also kind of don't,
mhm.
because at a certain point, I have to believe that my moral positions are superior to other people, because why else would I fight for them? Why else would I seek to change them? Now, I think there is, and you're right, people are not just their political positions, they're a constellation of experiences and things that have happened to them. And, I'm with Aaron Rabinowitz on the moral luck thing. I think it's luck all the way down. I think Nazis, just to pick, I think Adolf Hitler was a profoundly unlucky person because he lived a life that led him to being that type
Oh,
of a
I have
monster.
to listen to that podcast.
Right. I think that bad people are still fundamentally unlucky people for having been born into the circumstances that would lead them to be those people. Like, I have a
Mhm.
lot of compassion for them, but that doesn't mean at the end of the day I'm not going to stab a Nazi in the fucking face. Uh, if they're
I'm
going
sorry
to go
you're
do a
unlucky, but
Nazi
here you
thing,
go. You know.
right? I'm sorry that you're like this, but pop, right?
I
Like,
see.
it's like when rubber meets the road on whether or not people are going to suffer because of that constellation of misfortune is going to cause harm to somebody else, that's when you have to make a decision about how compassionate you're going to be for that. And I agree that very often people go from 0 to 1,000 a little too quickly sometimes. People go from "I kinda disagree" to "stab, stab." There's steps in between those, and we seem to, in the discourse, have lost some of those steps. That is something I would agree with you on. But what I don't agree with is that there should be some sort of thousand-yard view where I am putting myself morally in a comparable position to somebody who I fundamentally disagree with about my morals.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna end it here. This has been
Okay.
good though. This has been good though. And if I would have known we would have gone down this road, I would have started with this, because this turned out to be very interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can have you back on in a couple. I'm a couple months down the road on podcasts. I got a bunch of shit going on, but I do want to get you back on. Maybe we can talk about just this.
Okay, that
Yeah.
sounds good.
I'll
So
I'll hit you up in like a month or two.
that works for me, especially summertime. I'm free, man. So
Okay.
Mark Edwards, thanks a lot.
All right.